Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege. Please give a warm Trail Life welcome to Michael Farris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who says that 10 kids and 14 kids isn't politics? Other people call it a family reunion. We call it a precinct caucus. The good news is that 14's not stable. We have 2 daughters and 1 daughter-in-law, all set to give birth within the next 10 days. And so for the months out, I'll have 17 grandchildren. The irony of all that, it's really hilarious, actually, and this is absolutely true. When my wife and I were dating, I was a student at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, as was my wife. I won a college speech contest advocating zero population growth. I was awarded $35 as the prize. It was the week of the original Earth Day that happened. And for years, we celebrated Earth Day by buying $35 worth of disposable diapers. I want to talk to you about impossible victories today. And I want to tell you about some of the things that God's allowed me to be involved in the last 30 plus years, which is really hard since I'm only 37. I wish. I'm proud to tell you that last week was my 62nd birthday, and a friend of mine and I, we rode from Purcellville, Virginia to the U.S. Capitol, which is 51 miles, on our bikes. And I live to tell about it. So I plan on being around a long, long time to keep the fight going. The Washington Post wrote a front page news story on the day that Patrick Henry College opened its doors, which always surprised me about all the press attention a little tiny college got before we ever opened our doors, ever. They wrote another article, it was on page 3 of the Sunday paper, but it was almost a full page. And I hated that article until one lady read it and said she liked Patrick Henry College and wrote us a check for $300,000. Then it was my favorite article. It goes the old Texas saying, God can hit a straight lick with a crooked stick. And so, but on the day we opened, the Washington Post wrote this article quoting all these education experts saying that it was impossible to start a Christian liberal arts college in this day and age and be successful. I didn't know it was impossible. I just thought it was keeping me up at nights. But I really was encouraged by thinking it was impossible, because then I knew for sure that it was not a Mike Farris-sized project, but it was a God-sized project. And if we were engaged in a God-sized project, then we've got some possibility of being successful. We're now 14 years into the experiment called Patrick Henry College. We have about 200,000 square feet of buildings all paid for. We have 300 of the brightest students in the country every year. We see our kids going off to law school, the very top law schools in the country, Harvard, Yale, University of Virginia, Georgetown, and so on. Our students are going on a regular basis because we're just trying to take over. I mean, that's the simple thing. What the experts declared to be impossible is a present reality. When I started Homeschool Legal Defense Association just over 30 years ago, I had a friend of mine, This isn't an enemy. This isn't somebody who didn't want me to be successful. This is a friend who defended religious liberty cases. Tell me that it was impossible for HSLDA to succeed. We would never be successful. We would never beat the teachers union in what we were doing. Homeschooling would eke it out, maybe, but, you really shouldn't try to make it work through this organization. And you'll never beat the teachers union. They're too big, they're too powerful. 30 years later, actually, that same guy about 10 years after that came to me for advice about how to start a similar organization. God has blessed homeschooling, HSLDA, and the right of parents to direct the upbringing and education of their children in a mighty way, despite the predictions of many that it was impossible. Mostly, I've been a First Amendment litigator, which is religious freedom and freedom of conscience, freedom to teach, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. But I've also become a Fourth Amendment litigator. Fourth Amendment is the right of privacy in your own home. When the government comes knocking on your door and wants to get in your house and doesn't have a warrant, Fourth Amendment's implicated. And homeschoolers attracted a whole lot of unwarranted, in both senses of that term, attention of social workers around the country. And we've done so many Fourth Amendment appellate cases. There's actually a law review article written about this that basically poses the question, why are these homeschooling lawyers doing all these Fourth Amendment cases? I had a friend who was the president of the Virginia chapter of Victims of Child Abuse Laws. This is a person who is totally on my side on this issue. And she told me, you will never, ever succeed in getting social workers being required to obey the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. There's a social worker exception. Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost some cases, but we've never lost that principle. Every case we've ever litigated, if we lost, we've lost on some factual issue, not on the legal principle. The legal principle that the Fourth Amendment applies in child abuse investigation, we have won in case after case after case after case, collected big damages on that, on case, not in many cases, but a lot. We have seen great success in defending the right of parents in their own homes against unreasonable searches and seizures, despite claims that it was impossible to achieve that. I have seen God do the impossible. The experts in all these cases, and if I had time, I'd tell you some more, but in the experts in all these cases, whether they were friendly experts or opposing experts, every time they predicted that it was impossible to achieve these things, and every single time, they're just flat wrong. You guys, this organization, is trying to do the impossible. Now, I've started a lot of things. One of my friends, who's actually now a cabinet secretary in Virginia, is the Secretary of Natural Resources. He used to work with me. When I ran for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, he was my campaign manager. Doug has said to people, don't tell your problems to Mike Farris. He'll start some organization. I'm really glad to be here at the start of another organization, and I didn't do any of the work. You know, it's great. But you guys are launching a new, daring, bold, difficult, impossible organization in the midst of all kinds of, you're going to get mocked, you're going to be ridiculed, you're going to be taunted, you're going to be opposed. But most of all, you're going to be told it's impossible. And that will discourage even your friends when they're told it's impossible. In fact, I'm engaged in fact, the reason this is so fresh is I'm engaged right now in another impossible task. Again, don't tell Mike Farris your problems because he'll start something. I've started something else. It's called the Convention of the States Project. It's a project that is implementing, Mark Levin and I are working on exactly the same idea. We live about 8 miles apart. We had no idea that the other person was working on it. I launched an organization and website 8 days before his book was released. And it is exactly the same idea. He's got the idea and has promoted it wildly and successfully. And we're coming alongside building the organization, making it happen. The world says it's impossible. In fact, on my Facebook page last night, a guy posted, "This is a fantasy. This will never happen. You're just wasting people's time. And my response back to them is essentially the message that I'm giving to you today. I told them about starting HSLDA and people saying, is it possible? I told them about starting Patrick Henry College and people saying, is it possible? I've been involved in a lot of impossible tasks. And if other people have not tested God and seen God work the impossible, I don't want you to believe that Mike Farris does the impossible, because I don't. Because I know who does it. In fact, when I was out in front of Patrick Henry College about 2 weeks before we opened the door, I don't normally talk to myself out loud, but on that day I did. And I said out loud, I suppose it's too late to say we're not going to do this. Because I was feeling the pressure of trying to do the impossible. But because it is God's project and not my project, I have tested the Lord and I have seen him perform the impossible. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but daily for at least 30 years, although I've been a Christian for now, since November 9th, 1957 is the day I accepted Jesus as my personal Savior. So you go figure, it's a while. You are going to be successful because you're doing something that is right and the world deems it to be impossible. God can inhabit projects like that. And you're going to see God do great things through you. And I want to share with you some ideas about how God has blessed my life and principles you can derive from that that may help you, and especially for the young people that are here, may help you especially as you are leading the way in the years ahead. And I want to start off by my first something that happened in my first semester of law school. I went to Gonzaga Law School in Spokane, Washington, which is one of the best law, in fact, it is the best law school in the country in one particular category. And that category is law schools located on the north bank of the Spokane River. And that category, it's number 1. And I was in church on Sunday, about a month into law school, and I have no idea what the pastor was preaching about that Sunday. And just so you know, I'm a Baptist, and Baptists don't get to have words from the Lord or any cool things like that. And so, it's on page 7 of Baptist Rule Book. No fun, no cool stuff, okay? So, but somehow God got into my head this thought. Oh, those people in law school seem to know that you're a conservative. You're out there spouting out about the Constitution all the time. When are you going to tell anybody you're a Christian? It's like a little knife in my gut. And I committed myself at that moment that at my first opportunity, I was going to make that clear. The next day, I took a yellow piece of paper like this one and wrote on it, anybody interested in starting a law student's Bible study, contact Mike Farris, and posted it on the announcement board. I didn't go yelling at people. I didn't, start preaching in class. Just on the announcement board, I had the right to post a little announcement. I did. And the word circulated like mad through this law school that we got one of these Christian guys here, which is, I was at a Catholic law school. I guess I shouldn't have surprised people, but so we started this Bible study, and I called up a Christian lawyer in town to ask him to come speak at our Bible study a few weeks later. His name was Ray Eberly, and I told him who I was. He says, yeah, I've heard about that Bible study over there. He says, yeah, I'll speak at your Bible study. Would you like a job? I said, sure. I mean, literally word for word, that was my entire job interview. I was hired as a law clerk, then I became a legal intern, I became an associate lawyer, and I was a partner with Ray Eberly a few years later, and God allowed me to do some really interesting things through that experience. I was parking my car while I was still in law school, going to work for Ray Eberly, and one of my other law school buddies was walking across the street in front of the Spokane Opera House, And he was going to a similar job in a different law firm. And there was a notice on the Spokane Opera House that caught his attention, and he yelled out at me. He says, "Hey, Farris, they're putting a liquor license application here in the Opera House. I guess they're going to have a tavern here. And we can come over here and get drunk together, ha, 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 ha." And, so I just, took it good naturedly and went over and looked at the application. The Spokane Opera House is in the middle of a big city park. They've got a big kids recreation area. There's a Sheraton hotel right next door with all kinds of liquor outlets. There are bars on the street. So, if people want to go get alcohol right there in the vicinity, there's plenty of opportunities. I didn't think they needed to put a tavern in the city park. And so I formed an organization, the first of my organizations. See, I wasn't lying about that. It was called Citizens Opposed to Opera House Liquor, which is abbreviated COOL. And the press never asked me how many people there were in Citizens Opposed to Opera House Liquor. Never. I went through the whole thing and never got asked. There were 2 of us. There was an 85-year-old woman who had been a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and me. That was it. And we were successful in stopping. They actually had 2 applications, and one of them we completely stopped, and the other one got limited to special events, so it didn't become a full-time tavern. So God bless that. And as a result of that, I was in the newspapers and so on, and somebody called me up and said, there's a statewide organization to do what we today call social conservative politics. We'd like you to be on our board. So I got on their board. It was called the Umbrella Group. It was really called the Mother's Mafia. And it was all these women that were, in fact, it was my 4th grade Sunday school teacher who was one of the board members of the Mother's Mafia. And so they got me involved in stuff, and then Congress passed an extension of time for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. One of the Mother's Mafia, Dottie Roberts, called me up. I'm a lawyer 2 years now. And Dottie says, "Mike, Congress just has passed this changing of the rules for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. What do you think about that?" I said, "Well, I think that's blatantly unconstitutional." So she said, "So what are you going to do about it?" You don't tell Dottie no. And it didn't take much to prompt me to do something anyway. And so I filed the first legal challenge in the country, challenging the constitutionality of this act of Congress. And as a result of that, I started hanging out with Phyllis Schlafly. As a result, also Bev LaHaye came and did some rallies to support this lawsuit. I met Tim and Bev LaHaye. They invited me to get involved with them. I became the general counsel for Concerned Women for America. They moved me from Washington State to Washington, D.C. Hanging out with the LaHayes one day, I ran into a guy named Raymond Moore who talked my wife and I into homeschooling our kids. I started a Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I've now argued cases all over the country. I've been all over the world promoting homeschooling rights and religious freedom. I have been able to start a college. I've been able to do a lot of really cool stuff from a career perspective. A lot of cool stuff. Every single thing I've ever been able to do in my career, I can point back directly to the yellow piece of paper where I wrote, "Anybody interested in starting a Bible study? Contact Mike Farris." I was faithful. I was faithful in a little thing. The Bible says if you're faithful in little things, you get a chance to be faithful in bigger things. You get 5 talents, you do well with those 5 talents, you get more. And by the way, the reward for faithful service is more hard work. just so you're clear about that. One of the things God has allowed me to do is for 10 years I was the International Vice President of Christian Solidarity International, which is a human rights organization based in Switzerland. Now that was a board position, not a staff position, but I ended up going not all over the world, but many, many places to fight for religious freedom, particularly for the Christians and Jews in the Soviet Union. And we were there, I was there with my own congressman, Frank Wolf, in 1988, trying to get Christians and Jews released from prisons and the psychiatric camps and other things we were doing related to that. We smuggled in some Bibles, and we went to a church, Baptist church there in Moscow on Sunday, and a man my age, I was in my 30s at the time, a man my age came up to me after church. Now, the church was packed. There were 4,000 people in a church that was not as big as this room. And it was 80% old women, the next 10% were old men, and the rest mostly were younger women. Almost no younger men. Very, very few. But one of the few younger men came up to me after church and said, "Ruski Biblios." Now, I didn't speak any Russian. He didn't speak any English. But I knew what he wanted. He wanted a Russian Bible. And we had some back at our hotel. And so I wrote the name of our hotel in the back of my own Bible. And then I turned my watch to 2 o'clock. It said, Hotel Cosmos, 2 o'clock. So he knew what 2 o'clock was. I turned to my watch. And then I said, Metro. And so that was the name of the subway right across the street. So we agreed to meet at the Metro stop at the Cosmos Hotel at 2 o'clock for the Ruski Biblios. Okay, so we had this KGB following us around all the time. And so I was afraid to be delivering this Bible to this guy. But you know what they were going to do to me? The worst they were going to do to me is yell at me, because I was traveling with a congressman. You know, maybe they'd kick me out of the country, and that wouldn't have been terrible because it was a horrible place. And so I didn't have a lot to risk, but I was scared. I tell you the truth, I was scared. The guy I was meeting had everything to risk. And when I saw him, I had the Bible wrapped up in a T-shirt. We went out in the woods a little way from the subway station because I didn't want to get caught. I didn't want him to get caught. And I laid the T-shirt and the Bible down on the ground and pretended to tie my shoe like that was going to really fool the KGB. You know, talk about dumb spy. I mean, and so he picked up the Bible and went one way, and I ran the other way. And I thought about that later. He was afraid. I was afraid. Courage, I concluded, was not fearlessness. Courage is doing what's right, even when you have good reason to be afraid. You're going to have reasons to be afraid at times. Do what's right. God will bless you mightily. The last story of this sort that I'm going to tell you, it comes from Ohio. It's a homeschool case I did several years ago. The way things used to work at HSL Day, they're a little different now because we're a much larger organization. But I used to try all of the lawsuits. Today I do all the appeals, and I don't do all the trials. I do some of the trials, but mostly I just do the appeals. But at this time, the other lawyers work things up for the trial, and then I go try the lawsuits. And so I'd never really met the lady I was going to defend. Her name was Robin Deagle. I'd never really talked to Robin Deagle, but I was going out a day early to meet her and prepare her for case, and I had all the paperwork in front of me, and I'd already filed my brief in her case based on the paperwork that the other lawyers had worked up. And I had filed a First Amendment religious freedom defense, but as I was on the plane reviewing the paperwork again, I was really not sure that Robin was a Christian, and I'd argued that she was a Christian, Bible-believing, all this. I just couldn't get it out of her paperwork. And so I got to her house. It was a beautiful June day in Ohio, and we sat out in her backyard at her picnic table, and I was going through all the questions that I'd anticipate needing to ask her, and cross-examination and so on, the way you prepare a witness for trial. And when it came time to talk about a religious freedom case, I knew I needed to find out whether she was really a Christian or not. And so within just a second, I was able to conclude this lady believed in God, but she really had never accepted Jesus as her Savior. My wife and I had been involved in the Navigators when we were first married, and I learned to do the bridge diagram, and that's my favorite way still to share the gospel when I'm going to have the chance to write something down. And so I did the bridge diagram with Robin, and she prayed to receive Christ right then and there, and I was ecstatic. Keeping in mind, again, that I'm not a Baptist and I don't do prophecies or anything. In fact, I've been working for nonprofit organizations for 30 years. And so But, against character, I prophesied apparently over Robin and said, Robin, I think God's going to do something really powerful to welcome you to the family of God tomorrow in your case. And I just told her to start reading the Bible and stuff. And so next day we go to court. The judge called the lawyers into chambers ahead of time. That's not that unusual. Said, Mr. Farris, I've read your brief. It's not that unusual they read them. Sometimes they don't, but not that unusual. Says a good brief. That's not that unusual for them to pay compliments to the lawyers. He said, but even though it's a good brief, you're going to lose in here today. Now that's unusual. I've been in a lot of courtrooms where I thought the judge made up their mind before the trial ever started, but they're not supposed to tell you. They're supposed to keep an open mind and listen to the evidence and so on. Now, I'm sure that you had the same Bible passage going through your heads at this moment that I had it in my head at that moment. It's out of the book of Deuteronomy. And it's the passage that says, the prophet declares, thus saith the Lord, and it doesn't come to pass, you're supposed to stone the false prophet. So, I didn't have the guts to tell Robin what the judge said. I didn't want to get stoned. And, I told her to read the Bible. Maybe she stumbled into that in Deuteronomy. I don't know. And so I did say, Robin, this is going to be hard. This is going to be hard. We got to go to trial now. And so the prosecutor put the superintendent on the stand, and then it came time for me to cross-examine him. And a question popped into my head that I hadn't planned for. It's really kind of a silly question, and it's legally objectionable. But I asked it, and nobody objected. And the question was, Mr. Superintendent, did you get any legal advice before you denied this family the right to homeschool? He said, well, I didn't talk to any lawyers or anything like that, but I talked to some government officials. I said, well, like who? He said, well, like the judge here for one. We won that case that day. God delights in doing the impossible. I know it's been hard for you to get to this place. My own church has a Boy Scout troop. Actually, as of yesterday, we had a Boy Scout troop. The email went out this morning from the church leadership. I knew about it in advance, but this morning they announced that they're withdrawing from the Boy Scouts. They're not going to continue. And I know the pain that is causing people. And I think it's legitimate pain, and I don't think that they're wrong for feeling the pain. I think the people that changed are the ones that have done wrong. In the process of our church making the decision on this, I had the chance, they asked me what I thought. I think you figured out what I told them. But I told them about this pastor I know named Arlie Whitlow. Arlie's a buddy of mine, and Arlie takes good care of himself. Arlie is trim and fit and in really good shape. And he's older than I am, and he's trim and fit and in really good shape. And one day I saw him and I said, you really take good care of yourself. And he said to me, fat preachers can't preach on self-control. Woo! Because I've preached when I'm 40, 50 pounds overweight at times. And so people who want to preach about moral courage can't preach about moral courage when they cave in to the demands of a homosexual community that you give in to their views. When I was a child, I was very afraid of being attacked by the Soviet Union in a nuclear attack. Now, it was a legitimate fear. At least in retrospect, I still think it was a legitimate fear. First of all, I was alive and paying attention when Khrushchev said, "We will bury you," and banged his shoe at the UN. I grew up in Washington State, in Kennewick, Washington, which is one of the bedroom communities for the Hanford Nuclear Project. Like here in Tennessee, one of the nuclear weapons for the war in World War II was built at Tennessee. The other one was built at Hanford. And so we felt that we were at ground zero for a potential attack in the case of a nuclear war. And then we had air raid drills all the time. And we were supposed to, duck under our desks as if that was going to do something. And then we had to practice running home. They'd blow the whistle. And then the drill, the thing was that if there was the fire sirens went off and stayed on for 5 minutes, that was a sign of a nuclear attack. Well, I lived about 4 blocks from a fire station that had a malfunctioning siren. And about every 6 weeks, it would go off and stay on for a lot longer than 5 minutes. It scared me to death. I lived through fear of Soviet domination. And then I heard Ronald Reagan say, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall." And ladies and gentlemen, the thing that the whole world feared is no more. The Soviet Union is no more. Whatever it is that the Boy Scouts were fearing, the political pressure that they were fearing, that organization, I'm not saying that the problem of homosexuality is going to go away, but I believe that the political juggernaut that this represents, that people fear today, churches fear, people who own bakeries fear because they're going to try to shut them down, people who own flower shops fear. Other people are afraid of the political juggernaut, people who do not believe in liberty. This is not about equal protection. This is about silencing anyone who disagrees with you. That's what it's all about. This anti-freedom, anti-moral, anti-liberty movement that seems so powerful today, we will live to see that it is no more. So I say to you, do not fear the world. Attempt great things for God. Be faithful in little things. Be courageous when you have good reason to be afraid. The world cannot stand in the way of even one man who's willing to attempt great things for God. The Bible says, and I leave you with this, 1 can drive out 1,000. 2 can drive out 10,000. And if my math is correct, there's over 1,000 of you here today, and 1,000 can drive out millions upon millions. You will be successful. God bless you. Good luck.